we look at our text, Genesis chapter 13 and verse number 10, the text tells us that Lot had decided that he would go toward the plains of Jordan. It was well watered and everywhere for his cattle and his herdsmen, so it suited his need. Verse 12 would tell us that he dwelled in the cities of the plain and he pitched his tent toward Sodom. The Bible says that Lot was a just man, in particular in 2 Peter chapter 2, verse number 7, meaning Lot was righteous in the sight of God. But what we will see in this narrative is that Lot's desire would compromise him. What do you mean, Brother Todd? Let me give you some quick application. Sometimes we think that because we are children of God, that we are immune to trouble. We act as if we can get caught up in the influential environments that we allow ourselves to get in. Let me give you an illustration. Any of you ever been to a tough man contest? If you've never been to a tough man contest, it's full of testosterone, brother. You know what I'm talking about. And the thing that you see with a tough man contest is there's more fights outside the ring than there are in the ring. Why is that? Because it's an environment that's so intoxicating to aggression that one becomes entangled in it and he wants to fight it. And 9 times out of 10, I don't care what tough man contest you go to, a fight don't break out outside the ring. What's your point, preacher? James says this in James chapter 1 and verse number 14, and it bears noting this as we look at Lot. Every man is tempted when he's drawn away of his lone lust and enticed. What are you saying about Lot? Lot saw something that looked good to him. But not only does trouble's influential environment need to be recognized, church, but we also need to recognize the innovations by which trouble comes and compromises our faith. In our primary text of Genesis chapter 19 and verse number 1, it says, and there came 2 angels to Sodom at even, and Lot sat in the gate of Sodom. Something interesting about Lot in this text was that Lot had gotten comfortable in Sodom. Lot had took on a job in Sodom. He had enjoined himself to the city, and he had taken a position by historical accounts of Sodom is where the entry point to the markets were. This was also the place where judgments were conducted, social amusements, security. In other words, Lot had become part of the welcome center. Y'all know anything about a welcome center when you go into a new city? And those folks in there, hi, welcome to Little Rock. This is what Lot had done when he was at the gate. Lot had become comfortable in sin-filled Sodom, wicked Sodom. Lot's job in Sodom was compromising him. You know, some of us have been in some situations, I know I have, where my job has compromised me as a Christian. Some jobs will take you away from your convictions. Sometimes we get so entangled with making that dollar and prospering that we become oblivious to how the desire has pulled us away from God. It's tough to stand up for your convictions, church. But it's even tougher to stand before God knowing you didn't stand for your convictions. Paul's admonition to the young teacher Timothy is a lesson we should all consider when we consider trouble's innovations. Paul says in 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse number 10, for the love of money is the root of all evil, which while some have coveted after, they have erred from the faith and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. In other words, we have allowed the innovations of trouble to appeal to our inner desires and cloud our ability to discern what is most important, which is serving God. We end up straying from the faith. We end up believing that serving is too tedious. And then before you know it, oh, I got to chase that paper, so worship, worship, they ain't gonna be preaching about nothing anyway. Worship becomes bothersome. Fellowshipping really isn't that important. They're the same brother and I see every other week. They'll be the same even if I'm not there. And before we know it, church, because we've allowed trouble's innovations to cloud our judgment, before we know it, we stand a guilty distance from God. I'm mindful of what Jesus would say in Matthew chapter 6 and verse number 24, where he says, you can't serve God and mammon. That word mammon carries the implication of money. But let's go a little bit further. What about some of the relationships that we foster with those we come in contact with? Look at verse number 7 of our text. It says, and Lot says this to those who came to his door. I said,